We're just going to jump right into the discussion for the season 1 finale of Pluribus, episode 9, titled La Chica o el Mundo, which means the girl or the world. We're going to get into discussion with everything that happened in this episode. So many things happened. It was moving at a pace that we don't see quite often in this TV show, that is very slow paced, that allows us to really absorb what's happening, that allows things to build up as they may. So we're going to start off with the pre-introduction scene that is dedicated solely to Kusimayu, her little village that she has here, and what it looks like before and immediately after a immune individual joins them in their global hive mind. So we start off and we're in this village. We of course see the transportation of this quote unquote cure for Kusimayu's immuneness to the Pluribus. We see that getting transported by plane in silence, just as we saw during episode 2 with the hive moving in complete silence as they don't need to discuss anything. And then we come to the village and we see the Pluribus, and I'm going to call them that, the Pluribus. I'm not going to call them the villagers. We see the Pluribus sort of pretending to have human-like behavior. And they're doing that for Kusimayo's comfort, for her ease of mind. You know, you wouldn't want to live around the Pluribus if they were all just silent all the time and smiling. So on one hand, you can interpret that as the Pluribus being kind, as being thoughtful, as not wanting to make any of the survivors scared or disturbed. And so they behave in the manner that the villagers would have behaved prior to the joining. We know that these two women here have no need to discuss things. They even go so far as to make comments about the weather, about the sun, about the vibe of the day. All of these things they do verbally, which they don't need to do amongst themselves, but they do it in order to manipulate the remaining survivors. In this scene specifically, manipulate Kusimayu to make her feel that sort of social warmth towards them that would make them, the survivors, want to join the Pluribus. We're going to see this again with Zosha and Carol, and how Zosha simulates a human relationship. She simulates that social warmth, that acceptance, and the behaviors that Carol would like in a romantic partner. She simulates those all to bring down Carol's guard, to delay Carol in her aims of turning all of this back and saving the world, and so on and so forth. And we see Kusimayu with this goat here. She is tending to it, playing with it, showing it some love. She is the only immune individual in this village, so she is the only one capable of showing this animal individualistic, human love, essentially. And we'll see the goat's reaction to Kusimayu's joining and her departure later on, which is very, very sad. But for now, just as we saw in the previous episode, where Zosha took Carol to the auditorium where the Pluribus slept, and there was a dog named Bear Jordan, which was fond of one of the members, the bodies of the human now inhabited by the Pluribus. This theme of the relationship between mankind and nature being made flat or being made soulless is repeating throughout this series, throughout this season. And as we talk about how Manusos and Carol interact in their first discussion, we'll talk more about their differing moral frameworks, how they view humanity and humanity's place in the world, and how both of them differ from how the Pluribus views humanity. But the central conflict And the central thing that should be picking your brain as you watch this show is what makes a human a human. Is it the human body? Is it the fact that they look like a human? Is it the fact that they act like a human? Is it the human mind that makes someone a human? Or is it a combination of many things that make someone a human? And if it is a combination of many things, by what metric do you measure how human someone is, and therefore what level of human moral standard do you apply to them? But we'll talk more about that when we get to Manusos. Kusimayu was an individual we met in episode 2. She was someone who felt very alone, very frightened, and she wanted to be with the Pluribus. She wanted to join them right from the beginning. So it's a nice callback that we're back to her. Once again, it keeps the world large. Kusumayu, as well as the other people, have been in their respective hometowns this whole time. They didn't just freeze in place. They have, it's like, when you play The Sims and you let the game sort of play for you as you fast forward. That's kind of what's been happening with the other immune individuals. They all have their own lives that have been going on this entire time while we have been with Carol and Manusos. The hive brings her this sort of fume. It looked almost like dry ice or nitrogen. And once she inhaled this white smoke, this white fume from this tube that they brought, she begins to turn. So it's not an injection like I thought it would be. It is something you inhale, which, yeah, that kind of sucks. If they figure out how to make this thing, all they have to do is get Carol in a room and send that gas on its way into the room, and Carol is done for. So this makes it even worse. If it was an injection, we would say that Carol could just, fight off the hive anytime they tried to inject her. We would assume that the hive, who has claimed to not be able to enact violence, would not want to jab Carol with this Pluribus virus without her consent. But if it is something that's airborne, if it is a fume, they could unleash it on her, essentially without her consent, without harming her physically, and thereby bypass some of their biological imperatives. Someone on another video made a very interesting point about the religious motifs or religious sort of symbolism in the narrative of Pluribus. Although it might not be intentional, I have also noticed that as well, especially in the episode where Carol injects Zosha with the truth serum. I made a note in that discussion about how Carol is coming off like a sort of Satan figure. The hive is coming off as Garden of Eden, and Zosha is coming off as like an Eve or an Adam who Carol is seeking to corrupt or to bring out of the hive, to bring out of this metaphorical Garden of Eden. And in this scene where Kusimayu is officially joined and the entire Pluribus in this village evacuates the area to probably get to some more efficient area to be, we see the complete and total abandonment of the relationship between man and animal, the abandonment of the relationship between man and nature. And if you watch this scene, you'll feel something inside of you that just tells you that this is wrong. Something wrong has occurred here, even though everyone is happy and everyone is peaceful. Something is very wrong about just dropping these animals off, leaving all of these cultural artifacts just there with no one to tend to them, leaving the land with no one to tend to it, leaving the animals with no one to tend to them as well. There's something off and eerie and inhuman about it. In Christian theology, the purpose of mankind on the earth is to tend to the earth itself, to tend to the animals, to tend to nature, and to take care of it. There is an implication in Christian theology that the world is inherently wild or chaotic and in need of some stewardship or some sort of tending or maintenance. Because the hive has a biological imperative that seems to drive them to want to leave as little trace of human influence on the earth as possible. So no picking of fruit, no farming, because of course, if you farm things, you'll have to harvest it in the end. No husbandry, meaning no domestication of animals and all of this sort of thing. There's just something very soulless about it, something lacking about the human soul. There is a desire within human beings to have a relationship with nature that goes beyond merely observing it from the sidelines. And I think that is what people are picking up on here in this scene when they see the entire tribe, the entire village just evacuate the area and leave all the animals in it. It's kind of terrifying in a way. It made me wonder, what would the earth sound like if every single person had joined the hive? The earth would be completely silent, according to the rules of the world building that Pluribus has given us this entire season. The world would be completely silent. The world would be devoid of any distinguishable culture. Everything that humans do would be done purely for maximum efficiency so that they could build this giant antenna in order to spread the Pluribus to the next closest inhabited planet. So this was an amazing opening scene. It was there to remind you that just in case you had been getting swayed by the Pluribus, just in case your mind had been seduced by what it would feel like to be in the Pluribus, just in case Zosha was working on you too, just as it had been working on Carol, this is here to remind us that once you join the Pluribus, there is no trace of your former self and no trace of your former humanity. You become effectively silenced as a human being. And that is not something we want. And it makes Manusos's argument work better as we get deeper into the episode. And it makes us more frustrated with Carol's temporary selfishness as she tries to enjoy whatever she has with Zosha. The show is directly telling us as the audience, reminding us one last time before the season ends, this is why we are fighting against the Pluribus. The Pluribus makes everyone happy at the expense of taking away the human soul. All right, let's move on to the very next scene. We are back in Albuquerque, New Mexico with Carol and Zosha as they watch a live feed of Manusos, maybe from a satellite. Maybe, I don't think it would be a helicopter. I think Manusos would have noticed that, or someone else would have noticed that. But this is how the Pluribus has been watching Manusos the whole time. And it is very likely that this is how the Pluribus has been watching Carol during her period of solitary confinement and mental torture that she underwent on the behalf of the hive. We're going to go like little scene by scene here and kind of dissect what's going on here, because I think a lot is happening in Carol's mind that is being communicated purely through body language. And the Pluribus also sees this happening and attempts to sort of, in the previous scene when we saw Kusimayu beginning to seize up and beginning the transformation into the Pluribus, we saw a hand coming up behind her and grabbing the back of her neck to keep her stable. In this scene, very similarly, we see on Carol's face that she is thinking very deeply, and it is affecting her that Manusos came all the way from Paraguay. Because of that video she sent her, she is remembering that hope that she had when she made that video. And Zosha notices this, and just like the man whose hand came up behind Kusimayu's neck to stabilize her, we see Zosha get closer to Carol right after Carol's facial expression begins to change, and she puts her hand on Carol's back, almost as if to pull her out of her thoughts and back into the state she had been since she started dating Zosha, which is to be more agreeable with the hive and to ease up on her plans to turn everything back, at least from Zosha's perspective. We know, of course, that Carol has this entire time been sort of playing Zosha, playing the Pluribus, and gathering intel, gathering information. She never fully gave up, but she has been slipping. So let's just view this scene live here.
He did receive your first video.
Yeah?
Maybe he's heeding your call?
So let me just put it back on that final frame there. We see Carol's facial expression. She's clearly trying to keep her emotions in check, to not look a certain way in front of Zosha here. I don't know if you guys are picking up on what I'm picking up on. Let me just play it one more time for you.
He did receive your first video.
Yeah?
See that? Yeah. And then she does her signature meep face, the signature Rhea Seahorn meep. She is pursing her lips, pulling them inward, pulling that emotion inward, pulling that reaction back inward toward herself.
Maybe he's heeding your call?
Keeping her reaction bottled up, keeping her thoughts to herself. And then after Zosha says, maybe he's heeding your call, she looks back up to the camera. She looks deep in thought, like she is considering what Zosha just said. I feel like in all of this very short scene, just in those body language cues, we are seeing Carol begin to remember her former hope, her original plan, but it scares her a little bit. And we'll continue to see that fear, that anxiousness that she has. Remember, Carol has just come off of a period of solitary confinement. That is torture. That is severe psychological torture. Immediately after the solitary confinement ended, she went into a relationship with Zosha that is going from zero social contact for over a month to daily, constant, romantic social contact. And now we have Manusos coming back in potentially as a wrecking ball to all of this, thrusting Carol back into isolation if he behaves anything like she behaved, which caused the hive to evacuate her presence. And then just to show you what I was talking about with the hand on the back, the physical touch, that stabilizing, the attempt to stabilize Carol back to her former state, her more hive agreeable state. Zosha comes in and puts her hand on the back of Carol, telling her that she's probably going to have to leave because Manusos doesn't like them. And then Zosha tries to slyly suggest to Carol that Carol doesn't have to be here either. She could leave. This is clearly the Hive's attempt at delaying their cooperation because it knows that these are two highly motivated individuals. If they work together properly, they will figure out a way to undo this curse that has befallen the entire earth. I believe that is going to happen because of the Blood Song of Waikaro, chapter 16. Again, as a reminder, you can watch the audiobook version of that on my channel where I read it through. But in short, the main character of Carol's book falls ill because a curse has befallen her entire crew on the ship. Her crew is going to die if she doesn't do something, and so she goes on a long journey to a foreign location, to a sandy land with caves, to find a mysterious healer who claims to be able to reverse this curse. It is in that cave that the main character of Carol's book finds Raban, who she believed to be dead. The only catch is that Raban does not remember the main character, Lucasia. So I believe that that book heavily foreshadows the events of Pluribus in a manner that is coded and won't fully make sense until it actually happens. So I said that because the Hive is going to continuously, and I believe they're going to ramp it up in future seasons, their manipulation of Carol. I think Minusos is a brick wall. They won't be able to manipulate him until something drastic changes with him specifically. But for Carol, the door is slightly open here. And they're going to do everything they can to make sure that they can at least delay her until the cure, quote unquote, is created. So let's take a look at this scene.
Probably shouldn't be here when he arrives. It would upset him. You don't have to be here either, Carol. It's completely up to you.
Yeah. Just as in the first episode, where the Hive repeatedly told Carol, your body is your own, everything is up to you, they won't do anything you don't want to do. We have here again Zosha saying that, and we know that this is a lie. Carol says that the Hive cannot lie, but I personally believe the Hive lies all the time. Their lie is that they won't do anything to the survivors without their consent. They know for a fact Carol does not want to join them, yet they continue to investigate and continue to work on a quote-unquote cure for her, something that will change her. And we know that this is wrong. We know that Carol doesn't want this, yet they continue to do it. They told her that her body is her own, yet they are taking things that came from her body, her stem cells, without her knowledge, to create this transformation, fumes, whatever it is, transformation joining smoke that they create. So the Hive clearly has characteristics about it that are sinister and detrimental to humanity as a whole. They just dress it up in a form and in language and in body language that is pleasant to hear and pleasant to look at. There's even yet still more manipulation attempts by Zosha on Carol during this scene. Again, they're both playing one another, just as they were in the previous episode. Both of them are hiding something from one another. Both of them are trying to reach their goals. Carol's hope in saving the world is starting to be rekindled at this point. Yet she is trying to wheel back or reel in her emotions and her reactions and her true thoughts in this moment so that the Hive, so that Zosha does not become, I don't want to say upset, but doesn't catch on to what Carol is doing any more than they already are. We will take a quick look at the tail end of this conversation between them, where Carol asks if Minusos is dangerous. and we see Zosha's reaction. So right off the bat, let's just start from the beginning.
Well, hell, I owe it to him, don't I? I'll just hear him out and send him on his way.
Zosha does not look happy here. She's smiling, but you can tell that she's like kind of bummed out a little bit. The hive is a little bummed out that Carol still wants to see Manussos. They suggested to her that she leave the area and just not be here when he arrives. She says, I owe it to him for traveling all this way. That is Carol's way of sort of doing what Diabate said in the HDP episode. Remember, Diabate gave Carol some tips on how to speak to the hive and to deny them in a way that is more agreeable. So when the hive asked Diabate if he would like to join them, he said, not at this moment, but I'll give it some thought, something like that. And he was kind of trying to teach Carol that he's not joining them. He doesn't want to join them, but he says no in a way that is more friendly, more agreeable, and sort of omits or masks his true thoughts and emotions regarding the thing. Likewise, Carol is using those same tactics here. She wants to meet Manussos. That spark, that flame of her hope of saving the world is starting to heat up again. She's curious. She might even, if Zosha wasn't here, she might even be, having a tear of joy or relief that there is another human being, another immune individual that wants to talk to her. Not just a member of the Pluribus, not someone like Lakshmi who's only going to yell at her, not someone like Diabate whose presence is incompatible, let's say, with Carol's, the way he behaves towards the hive, but someone like her, someone like Manussos who speaks the same language as her, metaphorically, who wants to save the world and who was impacted by her speech in her video. She's probably feeling a great deal of relief at this point, even if she is feeling some anxiety there as well.
It's not like he's dangerous, is he?
So we see the hive determining and thinking about how they want to relay this information to Carol in a way that is so that they're not lying, but that they omit enough to keep Carol anxious, to keep her afraid of Manussos. So we see the ability of the hive to try and influence first impressions, to try and influence the way two people perceive one another. In this case, Zosha is trying to make Carol afraid of Manussos, cautious, so that perhaps she might decide not to meet him at all. Perhaps she might decide to send him away. Perhaps she might be confrontational to him such that Manussos does not want to work with her anymore. But the hive is kind of being like, hey, how can we tell Carol that this guy is potentially able to kill someone without lying and saying that he has killed someone or that he will try and kill Carol, because they don't know. They can't lie and say that he will try and kill Carol. So, reminder, Zosha is not a good person. She's not a person at all. She has a human body, which in and of itself grants her a certain level of moral consideration. We'll talk again more about that when we get to Carol and Manussos' conversation about how they both differently view the hive and how Manussos is perfectly fine with killing members of the hive potentially, whereas Carol is not. But Zosha, intellectually, in her soul, psychologically, she is no longer a human. She has one goal, and that is to convert all of the remaining survivors into members of the Pluribus. All right, Manussos has arrived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and is right outside of Carol's house. Now, the first thing that happens when we see the two of them together is that we see almost mirror or a repeat of the scene where Carol and Zosha were reunited after Carol's solitary confinement. Remember in that episode when Zosha came out of her car and Carol sort of walked down the side into the driveway and came down? They were sort of mirroring each other. The shot looked almost identical to this. We are seeing that again, but this time with Carol and Manousos. The difference here, though, is that Carol never leaves the driveway, never meets Manousos where he is, and we begin off on a rocky start between these two. Manousos then introduces himself with his, little sentence that he's been practicing all this time. My name is Manousos Oviedo. I'm not one of them, and I want to save the world.
My name is Manousos Oviedo. I am not one of them. I wish to save the world.
Hola.
I think Ray Seahorn's body language and facial acting communicates so much that is difficult to verbalize in a sentence. We all watch the scene and we can sense that she's relieved, that she is hopeful a little bit, but there's something still reserved about it all. It feels like she wants to go over to him. She wants to work with him. She's like, finally, someone who wants to talk to me, and not just talk to me, but talk to me about saving the world. I'm not crazy. I thought I was the only one on the planet Earth who wanted things to go back the way that they were, but now there's another person here. I'm not crazy. This isn't futile. And yet, there is still that hesitation and that reservation. Now, on social media, I saw people making fun of Carol. They're like, why is she acting like this throughout the episode? Why is she being so selfish? And I'm going to keep repeating it. Carol had witnessed the joining with her own two eyes. Her wife died that night. She's been pretty much alone for the majority of the time since then, specifically during her solitary confinement, which again is a form of torture. It's not just, something that just happened. The Hive legitimately psychologically tortured her for over a month, for 40 days. Again, with the religious sort of motifs here, 40 days, 40, the number 40 is common in Christian theology. In the Bible, you see 40 days being associated with transformation. So after the 40 days, she was broken. She was transformed into a different Carol, a Carol that was no longer, pursuing the mission as fiercely as she was before, a Carol that had become warmer towards the Hive, a Carol that was still scheming in the background, trying to figure out what she can figure out, trying to gather intel, but at the same time, she was legitimately being swayed and seduced by the Pluribus, by Zosha. This arrival of Manousos throws a wrench into all of that briefly, and then Carol reacts in the way that you would expect sort of like a frightened animal to react. She retreats from Manousos. She goes on a 2-week vacation with Zosha, almost to prove to herself that I can do this forever. I can just stay with the Hive forever and enjoy my life forever. I no longer have to try and save the world. I can enjoy this. But in the end, she doesn't. Something is missing, and she returns to help Manousos. But for now, we are with the two of them in their first meeting, and they kind of hate each other. Carol tells Manousos to remove his machete. Remember, Carol has not seen person, a human being, someone with a human body with a weapon since the joining. The hive has no use for weapons. Weapons are only things that are given to the immune individuals if they asked for them, like a grenade or like an atom bomb. But as for the people themselves, the Pluribus does not carry weapons, and they do not behave in a threatening manner. They are not capable of lying literally. They can lie by omission, but they cannot lie literally. And these are all things that Manusos is capable of doing. All of that anxiety of dealing with human beings, with dealing with people whose mind you can't read, with dealing with people who can lie, who can enact violence, all of that comes back again. And we see Carol retreating to her behaviors that she had in episode 1, blocking the door with the chair, peeking out of the blinds all of the time, and all that sort of thing. The next portion of the episode is an amazing feat of comedy and world building, just sort of making love and doing something so beautiful in terms of how this was portrayed to us, how this meeting and how sort of the framework, the foundation of Carol and Manusos' relationship is going to go for the remainder of this episode and into season 2. Of course, I'm talking about the translator app. Carol brings out her phone in airplane mode, as she claims, with a translator app in order to help her communicate with Manusos. This contrasts to how Manusos spent all of that time when he was traveling, attempting to learn English well enough to be able to communicate with Carol. We see Carol at the beginning of their meeting speak a little bit of Spanish, but then she goes back in the house and grabs her phone with the translator app. And I feel like that represents, every time Manusos, we've discussed him in previous episodes, every time I discussed him, I've always said he has this sort of iron will about him. He is like an unstoppable object. Carol is very strong. She has very strong conviction, but she does not have the iron will of Manusos. She spoke a little bit of Spanish, and then she gave up when it became too difficult and brought out the translator. That, I think, is going to become a theme of the two of them, with Manusos having that iron will, wanting to do things in the slower, more manual fashion, and Carol being willing to rely on a third party to make things easier, to make things faster and more pleasant for her.
Are you kidding me? You know what? You can get back in your ambulancia and fuck right off. I'm finito.
I also like how every time Manusos says Carol's name in the presence of the translator says unknown word or name. It's something small, but it does remind the audience that Carol is not a part of this thing. I'm talking about the Pluribus, the hive mind. She's not a part of it. Likewise, with the translator app, she's not a part of its database of knowledge. Like the Pluribus doesn't yet have Carol's thoughts, Carol's soul, Carol's identity absorbed into them, the translator also does not have, quote unquote, her name in its database. It doesn't know how to translate her. It doesn't know what she is. She is unknown word or name. In this scene, we get the primary philosophical and moral tension between Manusos and Carol when Manusos says, "Isn't it evil to value an ant the same as a man?"
¿Y no es malo valorar igual a un hombre que una hormiga?
And isn't it evil to value a man the same as an ant?
I noticed in the reactions and the reactions to people on social media that when they reached this scene, they felt something stirring in them intellectually. They felt like something profound had just been said. They felt like there was an argument to be made, but they also felt like something was a little bit off. They felt like Manusos's philosophy here wasn't wholly complete, and they also felt like Carol's wasn't wholly complete. So I'm going to break down the exact real-world philosophical frameworks that both of these characters are representing. So hopefully you have a greater appreciation of this scene. You have a greater appreciation of the philosophical battles that are being had here. And it's important because the philosophies and the moral frameworks that each of these characters represent are two very popular moral frameworks in the modern world that are actively competing for dominance in many of our nations and our societies. So what you're witnessing in this scene is the battle and the tension between hierarchy versus equality and utility versus rights. Now, these ideologies have specific names. Manussos here represents a sort of Nietzschean philosophy in which he believes that these pluribus people, these others, are no longer human because they have surrendered their individuality in favor of being a part of this collective, this herd. Now, Nietzsche believed that individuality or individual motives and individual-based behavior was morally good, and herd-based or communal or social-based behavior was morally evil. Nietzsche had a concept of what was called master morality and slave morality. The master in society is an individual who sort of has their own values, they value their own personal strength, they value their own personal nobility, and they're not obedient or deferent to the whims or the sort of desires of other people. They chase after their own desires, their own will, and their own individuality. Nietzsche believed this to be morally good, a morally good pursuit for a human being to engage in. The opposite of that was what he called the slave morality. So, in his definition, slave morality is something that assigns goodness to the concept of weakness or humility, or sort of prioritizes this sort of universal peace. These are the things that Nietzsche believed are psychological tools used by weak individuals to impose their will on strong, more noble, more influential individuals. And he believed this to be a sort of herd mentality. Nietzsche, very famously, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he hated Christianity because he believed Christianity promoted this slave morality, this concept of this sort of do unto others as you would have done unto you, or however you treat the least of thee and turn the other cheek. He believed these concepts to be evil because they prevented what he called the master mentality or the master morality, which he believed to be the key to accelerating human progress, allowing the strong, allowing the influential, allowing the noble to do what they want as they please, and to have them not be restrained by this concept of a universal peace or a universal kindness or a humility that was based in other people rather than the individual's wants or desires. And so if you take that philosophy, you could say that Manussos believes that the pluribus are no longer human because they all lack that master mentality, that ability to be individualistic, that ability to chase after one's individual goals or one's individual values. That has all gone away. And because of that, That therefore means that every member of the pluribus, every individual, is now evil. They are now anti-human, and they therefore are no longer deserving of the moral consideration that we would extend to other people. That is why Manusos is able to say that he's okay with killing or destroying as many members of the pluribus as he pleases that choose to stand in his way. It is why he is okay with enacting that experiment on that member of the pluribus that was sent to his house in order to discover what the radio frequency had to do with their hive mind abilities, and so on and so forth. The moral consideration he has for the pluribus individuals is that of the moral consideration he would have for an ant. So in short, Manusos's philosophy here is very utilitarian. The value of a thing, the moral value of a thing, is determined by its ability to quote unquote be human, and being human is defined as the human ability to be individualistic, to seek after one's own individual goals, and so on and so forth. Because the pluribus members don't have that, every single one of them is no longer a human, and the goal of restoring humanity to its former state justifies anything done to them because, again, they are no longer human and therefore do not obtain the human morality that we tend to extend to other people. Now, there are some insights into this philosophy, and there are also some counter arguments. Now, the insight here, or the pro in favor of the way this utilitarian manner that Manusos thinks, sometimes throughout history there have been experiments that have been done on animals or even people that granted us insights at a pace that was faster than where we would have gotten had we adhered to common morality of that time. You could say that certain experiments or certain inventions came about by individuals seeking selfishly after their own interest, which was the pursuit of a particular knowledge or a particular medicine or a particular technology, that their selfish and often immoral pursuit of those things granted us knowledge before we would have gotten it had we adhered perfectly to common morality. Therefore, someone in favor of this philosophy might say that Nietzsche is right. It is amoral to hinder or delay or to slow down human progress, human discovery, or in the case of the pluribus, to slow down the reversal of this hive mind takeover for silly things such as morals, when the alternative is potentially to be too slow and to have humanity fall at the hands of this alien hive mind. But there are many counters to this ideology. In case you are wondering, the very first one would be the flaws in the individuals who promote this kind of thinking them very selves. For instance, if you purport the superior individuals, the individuals who we should allow to just do as they please without severe or strong moral consideration, common moral consideration, who do you define as those people who are less deserving of moral consideration? People who are followers of Nietzsche tended to believe in various racist tropes, racist beliefs that certain groups of people were less deserving of moral consideration due to the fact that they were civilizationally weaker. Women are less deserving of moral consideration due to the fact that they are physically weaker. There are ideas of intelligence and value that change over time. So one group of people can be viewed as having less moral consideration due unto them because of their lack of utility. And then in another time period, it completely flips. There is a slippery slope. If you define humanness and thereby moral consideration based off of the ability to have human individuality, then what is the moral consideration, for instance, for a person in a coma? A person in a coma is not capable of any of the actions that someone like Nietzsche would describe as making them capable of being morally good or morally evil. They're not capable of individuality. Everything has to be done to them. They need to be fed. They need to be taken care of. They're not capable of individualistic thought. Is that person thereby then deserving of less moral consideration? Some people also, on the contrary to this philosophy, believe that this definition of humanity and thereby moral consideration is simply too narrow, that it is a feature of the human spirit that we grant moral consideration beyond the bounds of pure utilitarian usefulness or pure individualistic, quote unquote, human spirit-like behavior. In other words, some people believe that humanity and being a human and the moral consideration thereby due unto humans is not just about the human will to do what you want to do, but it is about the mere fact of having biological life and sentience. And that is where we get to Carol. And Carol would represent the more common philosophy that is in the world today, that is actively competing with the utilitarian or Nietzschean philosophy of Manousos, which is a sort of humanistic, deontological belief that sentience is what grants moral consideration. That moral consideration should not be based on what a person does or how they behave, but rather their capacity to experience life and suffering itself. Whereas the Nietzschean philosophy, the utilitarian philosophy, does not grant things or people an inherent moral worth. Carol's philosophy, which is deontology, does grant sentient creatures some level of inherent worth. Now, it might not be an equal moral worth between all species or all living things, as is the case with the Pluribus. The Pluribus takes Carol's philosophy to its extreme end, where all sentient things have equivalent moral worth. They cannot even pick an apple or harvest crops or domesticate animals and so on. Carol represents a more moderate, more modern sort of take on this philosophy, which is that sentience and the capacity to experience suffering is what grants moral consideration. So even though the Pluribus has taken away the human soul, the human spirit, that thing that Manousos' philosophy says makes something worthy of moral consideration, even though the Pluribus has taken that away from humanity and from most of the people on earth, Carol still believes that they have some level of moral consideration due onto them, simply pure to the fact that they maintain a human body and they have a capacity for suffering. Now, Carol's sort of insistence on this and her disrupting of Manousos' experiment later on in the episode is, of course, motivated and amplified by her feelings for Zosha, but still it represents that ideology nonetheless. In contrast to the Nietzschean philosophy of Manousos, people who have this sort of humanist or deontological philosophy, as Carol does, tend to view people like Manousos as kind of sociopathic, that they are lacking some sort of additional empathy that makes humans human. I spoke about it when we talked about the intro sequence with Kusimayu and how after she joined the Pluribus, they left all of their domesticated animals behind, especially that small goat that was, in distress, that everyone was leaving. And I made a note that there seems to be a common understanding that part of being a human, part of humanity, and what makes someone human is our capacity to grant moral worth and consideration and to have empathy for things that are not human at all, like a goat or a dog or a cat, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of philosophers who are in opposition to Manousos' way of seeing things say that, the capacity to suffer or sentience is the only prerequisite for granting something moral consideration. Now, the degree of moral consideration you might have for something is dependent on your own personal beliefs and so on and so forth, which can make things a bit hazy in society as we decide what we want to have moral consideration for. For instance, a vegan who refuses to eat animal-based products because they don't believe in the harming of animals under any circumstance, unless, self-defense, someone like Manousos would call that individual morally unjust or morally evil because they are enforcing their morality in a way that is not human-centered. And the Nietzschean person believes that human beings are the ones who define morality. There is no morality if human beings do not step in and define what that means. Therefore, it is a waste of time, or it is morally evil to base your morality in things that do not directly enhance human flourishing or human progress or human happiness. That anything else, defining your morality under any other terms, is a form of mental slavery. That is what the Nietzschean person believes. And there is something to that, but there are also some gaps. Like I said, the more humanist, deontological person believes that human beings have the capacity to feel empathy and to grant moral consideration to things that are less intelligent than us, things that are of a different species than us, people who are in a coma and can't even express any of their own individual thoughts, have any individual actions, that these things are also deserving of some level of moral consideration simply due to the fact that human beings are capable of giving to them that moral consideration. And then again, just to loop back on the counter from Manousos' side, someone like Manousos would argue that Carol's empathy impedes, delays, or even hinders completely progress during a critical time period where they don't have the luxury of time in order to find another way of discovering the cure for the Pluribus virus without harming or even killing members of the Pluribus itself. Like Manousos said, in a survival situation where perhaps a human being is starving, having moral consideration for an ant or a pig or a cow and refusing to kill them the same way you would refuse to kill a human and granting equal moral consideration, the Nietzschean would say that is evil. They have done something that is anti-human. The human, the moral thing to do at the time would be to kill the animal, the pig, the cow, or the ant, and feed it to you and your people so that you can continue living. So those are the two ideologies taken to their extreme, put in situations where the benefits and drawbacks are more apparent. And these are the two sort of popular moral frameworks that are competing in modern societies. So, in short, Manousos believes that Carol's way of thinking creates stagnation, it creates mediocrity, it creates unnecessary delays, and can even, when taken to its extreme, which is the pluribus, what the pluribus represents, the complete and total death of individuality. Carol, on the other side, believes that Manousos' way of thinking leads to cruelty, sociopathy, perhaps authoritarianism, lack of empathy, treating people as objects or statistics or, some sort of, other species. And that taken to its extreme can lead to some of the things that we see throughout history, like the conquering of nations, genocide, and so on and so forth. Again, these two ideologies, one last time, are competing because, I'm going to say it even in an even shorter way, Manousos represents survival, the morality of survival and what needs to be done to survive, and that human beings should not feel bad for doing what needs to be done to survive. That's a lot more, it's a lot more empathetic when you're in a life or death situation, such as you're stuck in the wilderness or you're in this pluribus situation. It becomes less empathetic when you're in a civilized society where things aren't that serious and so on and so forth. And Carol represents this sort of preservation of sanctity of life or the sanctity of mercy and things of that nature, which is very empathetic when you live in a civilized society, but becomes less empathetic and feels less worth it when you are in life or death situations concerning survival. So let me know what you guys think about this philosophical battle between these two characters. I don't know if this is going to be a theme that continues through the seasons. I heard somewhere on a podcast that Vince Gilligan does not write to a theme, meaning he doesn't write shows with a specific message in mind or a specific theme in mind. He just writes what he feels like writing, what feels good to write, and he sort of just goes with the flow. So I don't know if this is going to be a running theme over the course of this series, but I thought it was just interesting that a lot of people felt something very rich in this scene, felt like something intellectually stimulating was going on between them, but they didn't quite have the understanding of the exact terminology behind it. So let me know if you agree more with Manousos, and in what context do you agree with Manousos, or if you agree more with Carol, and in what contexts do you agree more with Carol? Additionally, I found it interesting how Carol in the scene sort of comes off as the new 11, or Manousos' 11. She's sort of treating him the way that the other survivors treated her in episode 2. So they're kind of mirrors of each other, just lagging at a different pace. I wonder if the Pluribus is going to attempt to manipulate Manousos the way they have done with Carol by sending him some sort of a partner or a chaperone. Now, we don't know much about Manousos' past. It seems like he didn't have a wife and he didn't have kids, and so he might not be as receptive to that as he was living just fine without those things. So he might not lean into it the way that the others immediately leaned into their own respective family members, and Carol eventually leaned into a replacement for Helen. The finger snap scene that occurred right after all of that was just so good. So Manousos is like just going through her entire house looking for any wires, any bugs. He is very focused on making sure that no one is listening, since Carol refuses to speak inside the ambulance or to speak outside. And Manousos makes a mistake. And I found this scene very interesting because, well, let's just watch it first.
I don't speak snap.
Huh?
So in this scene, there's, of course, the power struggle between them. Each of them views themselves to be the leader, and neither of them want to be the follower. So we see Manousos behaving in a way such that it displays that he views himself as the leader. Carol also tries to assert dominance by determining where they can talk, how they talk, and so on and so forth. But there's also the cultural differences between them. Snapping might be less disrespectful in some cultures than it is in American culture. Snapping at someone in American culture is very disrespectful. You only snap. I don't think anyone snaps at anyone anymore, but traditionally, I think you'd only snap at like a servant or something of that manner. There's also the gender differences, right? I made note that when Manousos first appeared, there's a lot of things going on, and we'll talk about it again when Carol, we see her reading that Ursula book, Left Hand or Left Side of Darkness, I believe it's called. But Carol hasn't been in contact with any sentient man of Manousos's level of, forwardness, or with Manousos's level of individual will. The machete he was holding scared her a lot. His capacity to disagree with her and to irritate her irritates her a lot. As we saw with Diabate in episode 2, concepts like race do not exist anymore. And concepts of sex and gender do not exist anymore. Again, when Manousos finds the monitor, the motion sensor that Helen had put in the alcohol cabinet, we understand that concepts of sexuality did not exist anymore. This is the first time Carol would have to sort of come out to another individual since the joining. And we know that Carol was closeted before the joining itself. So with him, Manousos brings all of those characteristics of human society, human communication, and so on that are unpleasant and make Carol paranoid, or make her feel uncomfortable, or make her feel vulnerable or awkward, and so on and so forth. Quick mention about this scene with the motion sensor in the alcohol cabinet. It served as a reminder for the stem cells and the frozen eggs that Carol gave. Some people remembered that from the first episode this whole time. I didn't. I completely forgot about all of that. And then I only really remembered it when it came to this scene. So not anything to note regarding the show per se, but just, a very pleasant and nice and satisfying tool that the writers use to remind the audience of things that will be important when they become important again, not mentioning them too soon or too late.
Mi esposa. She didn't like my glug, 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 glug.
Bro, how much of an alcoholic was Carol before the joining? Like, dang, she had a breathalyzer in her car, an entire alcohol cabinet. She had a motion sensor on the alcohol cabinet. Jeez. But at the same time, it does portray some of the innards, some of the unsightly aspects of Helen and Carol's relationship. We all loved the way that Helen and Carol's relationship was portrayed in episode 1. We all said it felt very natural, very comfortable. But as we go through this season, we begin to be reminded that normal human beings have abilities that the Pluribus doesn't have, and paramount is the ability to lie, the ability to say things that aren't true, the ability to do things behind someone's back and never tell them about it. Helen lied about how she felt about Carol's writing, both about the White Carol books and about Carol's personal book, The Bitter Chrysalis. Helen didn't like either of them. We also see that Helen put this monitor on the cabinet without Carol's being aware of it, most likely for Carol's own good and for the quality of the eggs that she was about to freeze, but still, we're learning more about Helen and Carol's relationship, and it puts into frame the relationship that Zosha and Carol have with one another, where the Pluribus is able to mold itself to be exactly what Carol wants and to give Carol what Helen wasn't able to give her, which is truthful and full-bodied love for Carol's writing, for Carol's personality, and a nonchalance concerning Carol's drinking habits. So later on in the day, after Carol has drank and watched Golden Girls, as she loves to do, she looks out the window, as was characteristic of her in episode 1. She looks out the window again after blocking her door, as she again did in episode 1, against a callback to those prior paranoid and fearful and vulnerable behaviors and thoughts have returned alongside Manussos. She sees Zosha's car outside of Manussos' house and rushes over because she is afraid at what could possibly be occurring. Maybe she thinks Zosha is cheating on her with Manussos. Maybe she thinks the Hive has sent Zosha to do what Zosha did to Carol to Manussos again. But either way, she busts in and she learns directly from Manussos that Zosha has told him everything. That little bit of information that Carol gave to him that said they can't lie, he has now, remembered and called to the front of his mind and asked Zosha very specific questions. Of course, the implication in this scene is that Zosha has told him intimate details about their relationship, about the sex that they had, about their dates, and whatever else he might have asked her. Carol views this as a complete and total violation. Now, as we discussed, when we discussed the Manussos and Carol scene where they talked underneath the umbrella, and I broke down the philosophies of both of them, Manussos Nietzschean, Carol deontological, Manussos utility through action, grants moral worth. Carol, there is moral worth because some things are simply sacred or some things have sanctity in them inherently. We see this coming up again, but this time through relationships and the sanctity of relationships. We see that Carol believes that there is an inherent sanctity due unto whatever she and Zosha have between them. Whatever she and Zosha have between them should be private, unless explicitly said otherwise, that it doesn't have to be private. Whereas the Pluribus, whereas Zosha and Manussos also understand that there is no such thing as sanctity among the Pluribus. These human concepts do not exist to them. There is no inherent worth that is unique to the relationship that Carol and Zosha have between another that is not also present between the relationship that Zosha and Manusos have to one another. Carol exhibits some desire for ownership, some possessiveness, some belief that there are qualities about her relationship with Zosha that are unique between the two of them. However, Zosha responds that she loves Manusos just the same as she loves Carol. And Carol is confused and frustrated and devastated by this statement because she knows that the Pluribus cannot lie. So that is truly how Zosha feels. And because someone on one of my previous videos made mention about how this show has some vague biblical sort of themes or allegories or metaphors, maybe not in a literal sense, like it's not a biblical story or anything, but some motifs, some themes, some concepts that are present in the Bible are also present in this show. I made, a connection to how the Pluribus comes off as sort of a Garden of Eden type figure or a God type figure, with Carol coming off as either Adam and Eve or as Satan himself trying to corrupt this Garden of Eden, and Manusos comes off as sort of like a savior type figure or another adversarial figure, and so on and so forth. So very fuzzy, but there are some small little similarities that you can see between them. This scene, again, reminded me of Jonah. Now, if you didn't know, Jonah is a figure in the Bible who was tasked with warning a specific nation about an incoming punishment that God was about to enact on them. Now, this group of people that Jonah was sent to warn were a group of people who had oppressed Jonah's people for a very long time. They have abused them, oppressed them, taken them as slaves at one point. And so instead of warning them about their incoming punishment, Jonah went in the opposite direction. And a lot of stuff happened, but eventually God made Jonah go to those people and warn them. And when Jonah warned them, those people took the warning seriously. They repented for their misdeeds, and God decided not to punish them at all. And Jonah was very, very angry at God for this. And God said, "Why are you angry?" And Jonah said, "Because I know," it was something along the lines of, "I know you're a merciful God that would forgive them if they turned away from their bad behaviors." And the story of Jonah is one of the few stories in the Bible that I feel speaks directly to the reader and says, are you okay with the fact that God has the same amount of love and compassion for your enemies as he does for you? Does that concept make sense to you? Can you compute that, and can you accept that? Or are you going to be like Jonah, who does not want the same amount of love that was shown to him to be shown to his enemies? Now, that story of Jonah is one that can be difficult for people to grapple with. This concept of how can God possibly have equal amounts of love for people who don't even know God as he does for people who have spent their entire life knowing God. Jonah believed that there should be a difference, that there should be an exception, there should be a favoritism shown to some people over others. But that concept was simply not a part of God's nature. And so we have that story of Jonah and all of the various concepts and messages and themes and yada, yada, yada in that story. This scene reminded me of that, with Carol being a Jonah-like figure and Zosha being the godlike figure. It is difficult for Carol to comprehend this inhuman behavior of not showing preference, not having a greater sense of love, not having a stronger relationship, a stronger tie, a stronger bond to someone whom you have spent time with compared to someone you haven't. But that is what the Pluribus does. That is how the Pluribus thinks, and that is what the Pluribus is capable of. They're capable of this inhuman level of universal love for each and every person. And while Carol, initially, as we discussed in Manussos and Carol's conversation under the umbrella, she initially did not comprehend what Manussos was saying in terms of, isn't it evil to value an ant in the same as a man? In this situation, we see that same concern appearing again, but this time in reference to relationships. Carol, in her mind, is probably thinking something along the lines of, isn't it evil to value the relationship you have with Manussos as equal to mine? And although Carol isn't fully broken out of her sort of hypnosis that Zosha has done to her at this moment, the cracks are beginning to show. She tries to give it one last go here. We'll see coming up after Manussos performs his experiment on one of the Pluribus hive members. But in short, she's not able to keep up this facade. Carol deep down knows that whatever she has going on with Zosha is nothing but a simulation. So another very interesting scene. There's so many interesting things that happened in this episode. We get more information concerning the Pluribus, how the mind control is working on these people. It is coming through perhaps another big antenna coming from Kepler 22b. Just a side note, Kepler 22b does not have to be the originator of this virus. It could just be one other relay of this virus that has touched with Earth and infected everyone on the Earth. But in previous episodes, all of this, I just love the way that threads are just being tied together, loose ends are being tightened up and cleaned up. We saw Manussos going through all of these various radio frequencies in multiple episodes. He stopped on one particular frequency. He went through every single radio frequency from 0 to 9999. And there was just one specific frequency that was giving a signal that wasn't just regular noise. It had a pattern to it. It had a rhythm to it. And when Manussos gets a hold of this other Pluribus member after Carol takes Zosha from him, he begins his experiments. And as we discussed in the section about Manussos' philosophical and moral framework versus Carol's, Manussos does not waste any time considering things like moral consideration for the hive individuals. He's okay with harming them if it means that he is able to gain some ground in his quest to reverse all of this and to restore humanity. So potentially he was going to keep this guy in his house the whole night, screaming at him over and over as he gathered more information. But that's besides the point. Carol shoots a gun to get him to stop. We'll talk about that later. But he discovers this, and I'll play the scene for you directly so that we all have it refreshed in our minds.
Son tres.
You're a psycho, you know that? Do you have any idea how many people you probably just killed? Hey, you're okay. You're okay.
So once again, multiple things. We see that tension between their two moral frameworks, Manussos, the Nietzschean, and Carol, the deontological. Carol says, do you have any idea how many people you just killed? That has moral weight to Carol because she believes in the inherent sanctity of life and the inherent moral worth of things capable of experiencing suffering. That is Carol's moral framework. Manussos does not believe in the inherent moral worth of things capable of suffering. He believes in the inherent moral worth of human beings. And human beings are defined as humans capable of engaging in behaviors unique to humans, such as our individual pursuit of our own goals, individual thoughts, and so on and so forth. Since the Pluribus members do not have those abilities, they are no longer human and therefore no longer deserving of moral consideration. That is why he doesn't react to what Carol says. He doesn't care how many individuals he just killed. He is focused on gathering information on how to reverse this alien takeover. Moving on to the actual contents of the scene, we hear that when the Pluribus communication, whatever glue is connecting them, is disrupted through this yelling, right? Let's talk about the yelling. We thought earlier that it was just negative emotions concentrated that would cause that communication between the hive mind to be disrupted and therefore make the hive mind seize up and potentially millions of people die, right? But with Manussos, we see that it's not just about negative emotions being directed at them. There is something about simply a strong emotion being directed at them. A strong emotion that isn't happiness or joy being directed at them causes this communication layer to fail and for the Pluribus to begin to seize up as perhaps the human beings buried deep inside them begin to struggle for that freedom and that control over their own bodies. So when this individual, this Pluribus individual, was seizing up, the radio frequency was blasting out a signal that was very unstructured, very unrhythmic. It didn't repeat as it usually did. It didn't sound as it usually did. Let's hear a glimpse of that once more.
Son 3.
So that is what it sounds like when the communication layer is disrupted and when the Pluribus is seizing up. And this is what it sounds like when they regain, the Pluribus regains that control and that communication layer.
Hey, you're okay. You're okay.
So that is what it sounds like. And then Manussos does something very interesting. While this Pluribus communication layer is disrupted and the individual is seizing up, he begins to speak with them. Manussos believes that if that communication layer that the Pluribus has is disrupted, then the inherent natural individual communication layer is freed up to receive messages. So that is why he is speaking to this individual, hoping that a message breaks through to him, almost as if it's someone in a coma, and you are speaking to them, hoping that in their coma, they can still hear you. This is not going to go away. Pretty much everything that we've seen in the show so far displays that the writers have a very strong grasp on all of the threads that they present to us, that they don't leave things they don't leave things unfinished. They don't refuse to wrap up any of these, little reveals or threads that they give to us. Everything is accounted for and remembered. So this is not going to go away. This specific individual, I believe, will have a role to play in future seasons. I believe that he will remember something. And I also believe that this same tactic will be used on Zosha at some point in one way or another to allow Carol to communicate with the real Zosha underneath the scenes. Oh boy, kind of like Severance season 2, with the plan that they concocted to be able to communicate with innies and outies to create one unified plan. However, in the middle of Manussos speaking to Rick, this individual, Carol comes back with the gun that she had from her cop car. Again, another loose thread being brought back in again. Carol came back with the shotgun from the police car that she stole in episode like 3 or 4. And she shoots the wall to get him to stop. This is going to come back again, I believe, in a behavior that will repeat in later seasons. I believe there's going to be a major conflict within Carol between whether or not she wants to lose Zosha, the girl, or save the world. And I think that Carol is going to stand in Manussos' way and in her own way regarding reversing all of this in the future, and that this is just a little taste or a little foreshadowing of what's to come. Now, Carol goes back to her house to check on Zosha, and is it just me, or does it seem like Zosha had a particularly bad reaction to this round of seizures than she had to the previous ones? She seems really affected, really worn out, like she has a gigantic migraine. She seems dehydrated. Could it be that Manussos, performing that experience in the way that he did and communicating with the individual, the human Rick, underneath the Pluribus, had a greater toll on the Pluribus than Carol's sort of undirected, unintentional breaking of that communication layer? So the Pluribus decides to give Manussos the same solitary confinement treatment that they gave Carol, this form of mental torture. Manussos seems to be coping with it just fine as he learns about electricity and all of that stuff. But I don't know if I'm just like dumb or what, but why was he in the trunk of her car? Like, I genuinely don't know why this happened. It was a funny scene to look at, but like, why was he in the trunk again? Were they planning together? Were they plotting together? Was this all a part of the plan? It seems to be that they were plotting together on some level, but that Carol didn't agree with his way of performing the experiment or something. But if you know why Manussos went into her trunk, please tell me in the comments, because I have no clue.
Carol Sturka, ¿quiere salvar el mundo o quiere salvar a su chica?
Unknown word or name. Do you want to save the world or get the girl?
Carol leaves. She does not want to go through that solitary confinement experience again, especially not with Manussos. She leaves to go on her, I don't know, a week or 2 long vacation with Zosha. So we get to the vacation that Carol has with Zosha while Manussos is undergoing his solitary confinement torture. Carol has decided she doesn't want to go through that a second time. Who can blame her? So she goes on a vacation with Zosha, presumably until Manussos cracks and requests that they come back. Unfortunately, the vacation was cut short thanks to Zosha reminding Carol of the fact that her eggs that she froze with Helen are going to be used as stem cells. But before we get to that, let's just take a look at what Carol is reading. She's reading a book called The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. Unfortunately, I have not read this book yet. It is on my list of book to reads. Every time I look up sci-fi books, this is like at the top of the list. Apparently, Ursula is like an S tier, God tier science fiction writer. But this is what Carol is reading. And this book and Ursula as a writer are hailed for her feminist themes, for her themes surrounding gender, for her social commentary in her sci-fi books. And we took a look at the Georgia O'Keeffe painting that Carol took from the museum in depth. So we're going to do the same thing here to this book and what it could possibly tell us about Carol, the kind of mental state she's in, and the kind of world that she desires, because nothing in the show is a mistake. This book was chosen for a reason. This book was written in 1969, and with it, Ursula essentially put the reader into a thought experiment. And the experiment was this: what if Earth had no concept of a fixed gender among people, no concept of a fixed sexuality amongst people, and that people were simply without any of this social performance, and they were just people. Now, the way that that is done in this book is that the main character, who is a man, goes to a planet that he is supposed to, be a sort of a diplomat towards and convince them to join his little group of planets that he's a part of. And on this planet, the people there are quote unquote neutral for the majority of their lives, meaning they are sexually, their sexuality, their sex, their gender is all neutral for the majority of the month. And then once a month, they go through a hormone cycle where some of them will develop more male characteristics, and some of them will develop more female characteristics. Anyone can become pregnant, and so on and so forth. The idea of this book is, what would society and therefore history look like if there was no fixed masculinity and no fixed femininity among people, and everyone was anything at different times of their lives? In this book, because anyone can become pregnant and give birth to a child, there is no concept of a sort of structural or enforced patriarchy. There is no domestic life, which some people are assigned to, and no public life, which other people are assigned to. The main character, who comes from Earth, where we do have sex and gender and enforced roles based off of your sex and gender, the main character struggles with how to sort of be diplomatic with these people, how to communicate with them properly, and how to perceive them in his mind himself. In the book, he repeatedly tries to categorize people as manly or effeminate, but it becomes increasingly difficult as apparently, from what I see in the summary, the character realizes that it's just not like that on this planet. Again, there are other thought experiments. Ursula suggests in the book that in a world without these strict concepts of gender, there would not be the mass wars that we've had on Earth, as without, this desire for the masculine, to dominate the feminine, there was never the kind of intense wars that we have on Earth. There has been conflict, but the conflict was not particularly well organized, and it was not gender coded as it would be on the planet Earth. And so the entire book is this kind of a thought experiment. What might humanity look like? How might humanity develop if sex and gender were a non-issue, were a thing that simply didn't exist as they exist on planet Earth today. Additionally, in this book, there are some themes of loneliness. The main character is the only person on that other planet that is a permanent gender and a permanent sex all the time. So he's an outcast. He's weird. He's viewed as sort of a pervert. The same way that some people might view people who call themselves non-binary or transgender or gay, they might consider them to be weird, or they might consider them to even be perverts. That is how the people of this planet in Left Hand of Darkness view the main character. So there are multiple themes going on in this book. There are feminist themes. There's also some more generic themes about loneliness. There are also some more other types of generic themes about what makes a human, what is the true human underneath all of the social performances and culture and ideas that we have, what is left of humanity, who would we be without the societies that we have crafted over time. And apparently, again, I haven't read it, but I did some quick searches when I was making this video. Apparently, one of the main takeaways from the book that people get is that we as human beings build our identities off of things that may very well simply not be real, may very well be creations that we have created simply because we created them. I hope to read this book soon, but I heard that her prose and the way that she writes is a bit complex, so I'm trying to build up my attention span to actually be able to read this properly. My attention span is completely and totally cooked because of social media. So there's that. All of this has bearing on Carol, just as the Georgia O'Keeffe painting, the specific painting, and who Georgia O'Keeffe was and what her paintings represented said something about Carol and her appreciation for that art. Likewise, Carol's choosing of this book to read on their vacation has something to do with Carol as well. It seems like Zosha and Carol are the only two individuals really on this vacation. So from Carol's perspective, she is living in a world where gender doesn't really matter anymore because they're both women, where sexuality is a non-issue because Carol is gay and Zosha is whatever sexuality Carol wants her to be. It is a world where Carol can be completely honest about who she is, what she wants, her personality, and Zosha will never misunderstand her and will never particularly judge her for those things and will always be completely honest. So it is a very different society than the one Carol is used to, which is why she might feel some desire to read a science fiction novel from Ursula. And just as Diabate made us remember in episode 2 that this is now a world where race no longer matters, your nation of origin, your language no longer matters. For Carol, this is a world where your gender and your sexuality no longer matter as well. Just another note in the very long song that Zosha and the Pluribus are playing for Carol, trying to seduce her into joining them. All right, their vacation continues. They're going all over the place. They're going to beaches. They're going to penthouses. They even went to an icy retreat. If you remember from episode 2 or 3, I believe, Carol and Helen's vacation to that Nordic icy retreat where they saw the aurora was extremely important to Carol. It left a huge impression and very fond memories. We know that from the context clues in the show itself, but also from that ARG or extracurricular lore that we got from the Blood Song of Waikaro, chapter 16. Again, I have that chapter up on my channel with me reading it to you guys so you guys can see it in case you don't have an Apple device to read it yourself. But in that chapter 16, we get what I believe to be a coded and veiled foreshadowing of the events and the central, what I believe to be the ending of Pluribus, but we're not going to talk about that again. I've talked about it so many times. But in that book, we see that Carol, in the author's note, calls her fans purples. She doesn't call them Wycarians. She doesn't call them my fans. She calls them true purples. That is the name of her fan base, the true purples. So purple is a very important color. I'll talk about why I'm mentioning that in a little bit. Just try and take a look at the clothing that the characters wear throughout the show and the colors on their clothing. But in her book, the god of her book world in Wycaro is called Aurora itself. So the god in her books is called Aurora. Her fans are called True Purple. And when Helen and Carol were in that icy retreat, they saw an aurora, and one of the colors on the aurora was a purple. The entire icy retreat lit up in a fuse of purples and blues. I've mentioned the color theory a lot with the show over the course of the season. Carol is associated with the color yellow. That is the color that is with her throughout all of the initial promotion material. The color theme of Pluribus's marketing material is yellow, and Carol was wearing a yellow jacket in the first episode for the entirety of the episode, pretty much. Zosha was associated with the color blue for the majority of the season, but for some reason, over the last 2 or 3 episodes, she has been increasingly associated with the color red, to the point where by this episode and the last episode, she's literally almost always wearing red or a shade of red. In this scene, you see that Zosha is, of course, wearing a red sweater and a red coat. And now Carol is associated with the color blue. Red and blue together make purple. So that is the color theory going on here. I'm not sure what that means, but it's intentional. Whether it's intentional from the writers themselves, I don't know, or if it's a choice that the costume designers are making, given some direction or some advice or some themes that they'd like to express to the audience through the writers and through the showrunners. I'm not particularly sure. Now, after mentioning all of that, I completely forgot why I said that and what led into it. So I'm just going to continue with my notes for this scene. This is all an act. Carol finally breaks out of her little cognitive sort of wishes, her desires for all of this to just be okay and to be okay with it all. She says she's never been happier in her life. And then Zosha, once again, in her typical fashion, says something she probably ought not to have said. She says, "It only gets better from here," which reminds Carol that the Pluribus is ultimately trying to get her to join them. That is the only goal they have at the end of this. There is no, frolicking for the rest of their lives, ending their lives together, growing old together, getting married. There's really none of that. It's all just a simulation to get Carol to join them. It's all fake. As we saw with Kusimayu at the beginning of the episode, the cultural elements of Kusimayu's village were all fake. All of the people were behaving in fake manners, saying things they didn't have to say, making remarks about the day, the vibe of the day, making conversation with Kusimayu. All of that was completely fake. As soon as Kusimayu joined them, they ceased talking, they ceased making any noise whatsoever, and they left everything behind. It was all an act. With Diabate, he is very aware that it is all an act, but he doesn't care at the particular moment. We see time and time again that the Pluribus acts and pretends for his benefit to make him comfortable. And then again, we as the audience and Carol herself in the show are reminded that Zosha, as friendly as she seems, as loving and romantic as she seems, it is all an act. The instant Carol joins them, Zosha ceases to talk to Carol, ceases to really interact with her, really, at all. And this entire relationship is completely gone and meaningless and is as if it never occurred. This concept, like we saw in the scene where Carol was arguing with Zosha over Zosha saying that she loves Manousos just as much as she loves her. This concept of the relationship having no unique qualities about it, the relationship between Carol and Zosha having no unique qualities about it on Zosha's end, just like the relationship Carol has with a stranger or the relationship Carol has with a lover, it's all the same to Zosha. That concept doesn't really compute with Carol very well. It doesn't really make sense to her. It is very inhuman. And this is what snaps her out of it, that inhuman quality about the way that Zosha thinks about Carol and Carol's relationship becomes apparent in this scene when she is made privy to the information that Zosha has been hiding from her, which is that they have her stem cells and they are using them to create a quote-unquote cure for Carol such that she is able to turn. Now, from the opening scene with Kusimaya, we know that the cure comes in the form of a fume, in the form of a gas. It's not an injection. All they have to do, if they wanted to, was to have that gas with them, open up the vial when Carol is nearby, and Carol is completely cooked. She turns and she joins them, even against her will. I know the hive mind says they won't do anything against her will. I believe that they lie by omission. I believe that the writers will cook up a way for them to be able to turn someone without that person wanting to be turned. And I think things will get very scary at that point. But for now, Carol realizes she still only has about a month, maybe 3 at best, to figure out how to reverse all of this. The Pluribus's attempt to recreate that icy retreat that Helen and Carol had together that was so impactful to Carol, to recreate it in a way that Carol might have liked a little bit more with, this fireplace and furniture that's not made of ice. It worked for some time, but our girl Carol still has, at the end of the day, her mind on the prize, her mind on the mission, and she decides to leave Zosha in favor of teaming up with Manousos to determine a cure. So while Manousos is in his solitary confinement and he is learning about electricity, learning about radio frequencies, learning about transmission and antennas and all of this stuff, Manousos is a genius. He figured out what was necessary learning for him. I think Carol and Manousos will make a very good team because Carol is able to grab information from the Pluribus because of her relationship with it. But Manousos is able to do the actual hard work, the learning. We saw that he is willing to learn. We saw that with his willingness to learn English as he traveled from Paraguay to New Mexico. We saw his iron will as he tried to make it through that jungle, the gap, on his own. And then we see him again, learning about radio frequencies, learning about electricity, and learning about transmission. Carol comes back and in typical fashion, in stereotypical fashion, apparently lesbian breakups are extremely brutal. Carol orders an atom bomb that signifies, I guess how explosive this breakup was for her. It's probably something she's been wanting to ask for a while. She finally does it. It's once again a callback to a previous episode. Threads being tied up and cleaned up and tidied up in the finale. All very nice. And Carol and Manousos are officially a team in episode 9, the finale of Pluribus season 1. What a fantastic season of television. I know there are some people who are saying that it's too slow for them, that nothing happens. I have the complete and opposite opinion. I think a lot is happening in each and every episode. It's just portrayed in a way that maybe people aren't used to it being portrayed. It's portrayed in a slow burn, with a slow burn aura, even though quite a bit is happening in each and every episode. This is a very fast-paced episode in and of itself, second only to the first episode, I guess, in how fast-paced it was to me. I think this is a story about the characters, the connections between characters, the dynamics between characters, the self-discovery that Carol herself is going through. I really want seasons of this show to come out quicker. I wish there could be one every year, but it's looking like there's going to be a 2 or 3 year delay between seasons, which is unfortunate. Let me know what you guys think of season 1 of Pluribus. Thank you guys for watching all of my discussion videos.